Cool. Let's get started. Thanks everybody for coming out for this Data for Good. This is a real fun event for us that this particular meetup has been brought about, given a lot of feedback we've gotten from the Data for Good community here in Saskatchewan about careers and how do I get into the field and what should my practice be and what should I focus on? And there's so many things. We've had so many great presenters from Saskatchewan here talk about their data teams and such. So we've got three real wonderful people here tonight to talk about their roles and their career in the data world. And so we're going to have a bit of an opportunity for our three speakers to each talk a bit about themselves. And then after that, we'll have a pretty much an open panel and a Q&A. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Data for Good, if you're unfamiliar about who we are and what we do. Data for Good in Saskatchewan here has two primary purposes. Our first purpose is to build data literacy in socially focused organizations. And so that could be small one-person nonprofits up to larger charities. And I'll share what a couple of those projects have, or what some of those projects have been in the past. But really, we want to help organizations that are doing good for the people or for the environment succeed in their mission, and we help them get better at using data to do that. The second thing is we want to contribute positively to the data community here in Saskatchewan. And actually, it's not just Saskatchewan, it's across Canada. So Data for Good is actually a national organization, and we have chapters all across Canada. And so chapters generally are housed within cities. And so sometimes the individual chapters do their own thing and work with charities and localize to their geographic. And then sometimes the chapters get together and we do national datathons and national projects. And so really this is from a local to a national, and in some cases even a global level. We're all about contributing to the social good of the world and the data communities that serve them. In our particular chapter here in Regina, we have four leads who run this particular chapter. So myself, Scott Wells, is on the board. Marina and Josh West, who coincidentally is west of us. And then we have two leads also that support some of our other initiatives. So we have Cody Rogers. And if you've ever been a speaker at one of our meetups, you've talked to Cody, and he's the guy who makes sure that everybody has the right information. He makes sure that I get the Zoom link out, and he really makes sure these meetups happen. So we really like having this guy on board. And we have Arnav, who's our last DataViz champion and also our new DataViz lead. And I'll talk a little bit about what those DataViz leads are, or what a DataViz lead does here in a second. So really, when you look at the structure of how Data for Good works, there's this looks like some type of hierarchy, perhaps, but it's not. Really, Data for Good is a organization that serves the community, and it's owned by the community. We just have some people who help shepherd the work. So we do four particular things right now in the Regina chapter and Saskatchewan chapters. We have meetups, which you're at right now. We do some light projects. We do some major projects. And then we have our DataViz challenges. And our community leads and our DataViz leads and the chapters leads, we help kind of lead these things, but they're really run by volunteers. Well, we're all volunteers, but we have a large volunteer base that we use where we all come together and execute these projects. So DataViz challenges, these are pretty exciting. Our last DataViz challenge, we had SAS Polytech was a sponsor of our DataViz challenge, and they donated a bunch of courses. And then SGI donated some data sets on bike accidents in Regina. And what happened is our DataViz challenges run for 90 days. You can participate as an individual, or you can participate as a group. And essentially everybody takes a data set and visualizes that data set. And then they all present their data visualizations at the end of 90 days. So here's an example of some of the data set or visualizations that we got. People notice all types of interesting things and presented the data in all types of interesting ways. So this is really, if you're looking to build your portfolio, or you're looking to show off some of your data skills, or you're looking to learn about data visualization, this is a really good opportunity for you to either work on your own with a data set or work with a group of people. Our next DataViz challenge will be happening in January. And so more details will be coming out about the data set and all that stuff closer to then. Our last Data Viz champions was Arnav, who was a Data Viz champ, which we had some judges judge all the Data Vizes, and then we had the People's Choice Award, which was Mike Regina, and we have some of their submissions here. We also do these meetups, which you're familiar with, and so if you or somebody you know wants to speak at one of these meetups, please get a hold of us. We've had organizations like the Rough Riders or Precision AI, Pro Bono Law Saskatchewan, 211, all these types of different people and organizations come and talk to us. And whether it's about how to use drones to more efficiently apply pesticide like Precision AI is doing, or your the Rough Riders, and you're talking about football and data, the point of these meetups is to have people come together and talk about data and share their learnings. Of course, they used to be in person, and this was our first Data Viz meetup in 2017, or sorry, our first meetup in 2017 at ISM there, but now we're a little bit more remote due to COVID. We'll see what the future holds in regards to whether we get back in person or not. The last thing we do is projects. And so these are some of the projects that we've taken on in the past couple of years. We work with organizations that, have 10 years worth of data on one sheet of a spreadsheet, or organizations that are a little bit more mature when it comes to their data infrastructure, like the food bank. So we're really always looking for charities and nonprofits to work with on any level. We have volunteers who are just getting into the data field, and we have volunteers who are geniuses and some of the top data talent in Saskatchewan. So if you are wanting to work on a project, our website will come up at the end here, and you can sign up to be a volunteer. And if you know of a charity or a nonprofit, get a hold of one of us data leads if you know of a charity or a nonprofit that could use our services. We're 100% volunteer based. That means no fees and no GST. So the last thing we're looking for, I think I kind of went over all of this already, but looking for charities or nonprofits. We're always looking for data volunteers, senior, people who are looking to provide some leadership on our projects or mentorship. We always, it seems that in a lot of our projects, there are mentors and mentees, which helps everybody learn. And then we are looking for data sets for ongoing data viz challenges. We usually have about 3 data viz challenges a year. And so we're always looking for data sets. And when thinking about that, like large data sets usually work well. All right, I think that's about it for me. Actually, before I get into these guys, here's our contact information. So if you want to follow us on all of our social channels, we aren't the best at keeping up all of our social channels, but if you want to know what's going on, the best place to be involved with us is on our Meetup. You can also go to our website. That's where the volunteer sign-up forms are. Or if you have a project you want us to look at, there's actually a project intake form on the site as well. When applicable, the slides are available that our presenters have on slideshare.net. And we post on Twitter, and occasionally we post on Instagram. And if you want to get on our Slack channel or Data for Good Regina Slack channel, just shoot me a note at kevin.hayes@dataforgood.ca. All righty. We have 3 awesome speakers tonight, Scott Wells, Scott Moeller, and Mike Burjack. And so these 3 folks are at various stages of their career when it comes to data. And so the purpose of tonight is to have these gentlemen speak about their work life and share about a bit of their path of how they got to where they've gotten. So each speaker will take about 10 to 15 minutes to talk, and then some may have slides and some may not. And then at the end of this, we'll have an open forum, a Q&A discussion forum, where you guys can ask Scott or Mike any questions that you have about anything that they've talked about. So we're going to have Scott Moeller go first, Scott Wells go second, and Mike Burjack go third. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Mike Burjack, do you have anything to share, or are you just going to talk?
I'll probably just talk.
Okay, perfect. All right. Mr. Moeller, the floor is now yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so my name is Scott. and I'm going to tell you a bit about my journey into the data field. This will be from the perspective of someone who's pretty new to the field. I am a data scientist at eHealth Saskatchewan, and I've been at eHealth since July of this year. So it's perspective of someone relatively new. So I hope I can answer some questions for other people who are looking to maybe get into the field and make a career change, or just interested in what it takes and kind of the learning path to get to where I am. So I do have an engineering background. I'm an industrial systems engineering graduate from the U of R. I graduated in 2017. And then I spent the next 4 years working at SaskEnergy as a pipeline facilities engineer. What that means is I was kind of a design engineer and project manager on capital projects to design and construct piping facilities for Saskatchewan's natural gas system. Although technical, it wasn't really a data career. So being a data scientist in this role now, my interest and my learning to get here really all happened on my own time. So that's kind of what I'll talk about now. Really, my start was when I picked up Python as a hobby a couple of years ago. I think I was talking to someone that I worked with, and I learned that they taught themselves how to code and build mobile apps all in their spare time, even though it had nothing to do with their day job. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I really had never considered that before. So I started researching how to teach yourself to code, landed on Python. My first resource was a book called Automate the Boring Stuff. It's a classic Python book available for free online. Kind of teaches you the Python language while teaching you how to automate some simple tasks and repetitive stuff. And once I read that book, I kind of learned enough to build a project, and that's what I did. I built something that kind of automated something I did on a monthly basis for a rental property I owned, and I kind of was immediately hooked on that, and I wanted to keep learning more and that kind of thing. Soon thereafter, I think I discovered my first data science library. Pandas is what it's called. And then from there, I think the YouTube algorithm really took over and just started showing me data science videos and machine learning, and kind of went down a rabbit hole of all that kind of stuff. Another key influence for me was that my partner also works in data and analytics field. So the more I heard about what she did and the kind of projects they worked on, the more I kind of realized that this was the best of both worlds. It had the coding and the software side that I was really enjoying, but it also leveraged the things that I was doing in my engineering job and that I had learned and kind of was growing in that sense. So that included, the creative problem solving, decision making, analytics, and kind of the math background. So that's kind of for me when it clicked that I could maybe make a career of this, and that it was something that I should maybe pursue a little bit more seriously. I figured out, although it is a growing field and there's more and more data jobs, they are very competitive, and there's lots and lots to know and to teach yourself. So that's kind of where I got more serious about it. And I just started spending my mornings before work and weekends and spare time and that kind of thing, teaching myself, spend an hour or two a day kind of doing that. And I really took advantage of mostly free resources. I used YouTube, Coursera, Kaggle, Udemy. I bought one book, I think, the whole time. Everything else was all self-taught online. And I can share a list of good resources if anyone's interested. And, that's kind of the path I was taking for a while. And there are a lot of challenges when you try to do this self-taught. You don't always know what you don't know. So I find it was difficult to know, am I on the right path? Am I learning the things that are actually going to make me employable? And where are my gaps and that kind of thing? There's some resources out there, that can help you structure an outline and that kind of thing. But something that I thought was very useful was to actually look at some job postings about jobs that I was interested in and see, what their requirements are, go and teach myself those things, and then build a project with that new skill that I just acquired. One caveat there is I would look at multiple job postings. Sometimes they'll ask for the world and have a list of requirements that aren't necessary to get your foot in the door and get your first data job. So be mindful of that. But the main point there is learn these new skills. And then I think the best way is to build a project with them. Really put those skills to the test. And bonus points if you can create a portfolio while you're doing that. Since it's such a competitive industry, it really helps set you apart if while you're learning these skills, you're able to demonstrate, here's a project I've worked on, or maybe even writing a blog. Like every topic that you learn, you can write a little blog post and make that available on GitHub or something like that. That'll also help you stay focused, which I had a hard time doing. I think when you're doing the self-taught thing, it's very easy to jump from project to project or topic to topic. Every shiny new course that comes out, I would jump ship and think I needed to go learn that. And in hindsight, it's way more efficient to actually stay focused and complete a project, maybe get it on your portfolio and do it that way. Another huge thing I think is to join a community like Data for Good. That's very valuable for me. One, it builds your network, which is always great, gives you new opportunities, meet new people and really expand the way you think. And also get some practical experience. I mean, we all know that jobs require experience a lot of the time, but how do you get experience without having a job? A great way to do that is to volunteer for a project like the Regina Food Bank. That was one that I did last year with Data for Good. I volunteered for the reporting and the forecasting team. I didn't know a lot about either of those when I joined, but it was great experience, kind of highlighted some of my strengths, showed me a lot of what I needed to learn. And I think most importantly is I got to work with the team, see how other people think, how people approach problems. And that was very, very beneficial for me. And those are kind of the steps that I followed to work at it for a while. And in the July of this year, I was the successful candidate at eHealth to become a data scientist. And I'll give you a little bit of background on eHealth in terms of how our data department is structured. Our group is known as Information and Analytics. We have 2 data scientists, some information analysts, which are similar to data analysts. They would work a lot with SQL and BI tools to do reports and dashboards and that kind of thing. We have data quality analysts. We have a data warehouse team, which consists of 2 data engineers and some data warehouse administrators. And as data scientists, we're kind of expected to have a broad technical knowledge base, including ETL, extract, transform, and loading of data, SQL, BI tools like Power BI. And then what kind of sets the data scientists apart would be to have more advanced analytic skills, usually using Python or R. And you'd be doing statistical modeling, predictive modeling, forecasting, and that kind of stuff. I think it's important to also highlight that it's necessary to have some non-technical skills to go with those. For instance, how to communicate and present data to different stakeholders, whether they're technical or non-technical, managers, executives, and that kind of thing. That goes a long way, and that's definitely a necessary skill. And then also at eHealth, the data scientists are kind of structured to help lead the teams of maybe some junior folks that are looking for some mentorship. So we kind of help them structure their projects, maybe help understand the business requirements and what the asks are. Do we have the data to do that, and kind of help them structure their projects that way. And that really summarizes my journey into the data field so far. But I've learned a lot to get to this point, and there's obviously so much to know. I think that's one of the really rewarding parts about working in here is there's really a never-ending path of things you could learn. And once you're in here now, I feel like I can take my career so many different ways, and I find that very cool. And likewise, paths to get to where I am. I mean, I just described my path to get here, but looking around, there's so many different backgrounds in data. People can come from any sort of background. It certainly helps if you're technical, maybe computer science, engineering, stats, math, but definitely not required. And I think that's cool that you can be self-taught. If you can prove you have the skills and work hard at it, you can make yourself employable. And I think it's pretty rewarding. place to work. So with that, I hope I answered some questions, and I'll be happy to answer anything else anyone has at the end of this.
That was awesome, Scott. Thanks for that. And we'll hold questions till the end. I know I'm certainly having a bit of a challenge right now doing that, Scott. I got a lot for you, but if I can practice some restraint, then let's keep on rolling, and we'll have Q&A after all three people speak. Thanks a lot, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
So going over to Scott number 2, just in sequential order, not in favorability. Well, I guess we'll wait to see how this talk goes, but Scott Wells.
We don't know. It might be stacked ranked. All right. Can you give me access to screen share? All right. Can folks see my screen? All right. Excellent. So for other folks that maybe don't know, Scott and I, while we share a same name, we actually kind of swapped organizations early on. So in the summer, he came over to eHealth and I had actually moved out. So a little bit in common there as well. So good evening, everyone. I am currently the Director of Business Process and Analytics at SaskEnergy, but I'll walk through a little bit of what my career looked like. A little bit different than Scott's. Obviously, I'm a little bit older, and so my career started substantially earlier on. So for some context, I started in data and analytics in 2008. So very different world back then. Python, R, Tableau, Microsoft Power BI. A lot of those things were either in their infancy or not available. And so very, very different world. When you're talking about reporting and analytics, this is typically what you probably would have seen in most organizations. So not pretty visuals, really just kind of Excel and otherwise being used. Data science really as kind of an area didn't exist for the most part in most organizations. So that's just a little context kind of when I had started. My background, I did finance in university, minored in economics. Went back to school later on for my MBA. My only experience in computer science was actually in high school, doing some QBasic and a little bit of C++ in university. So very minimal in that. And most of it, like Scott Moeller, was kind of on my own stuff that I enjoyed doing. So I'm going to do kind of just an overview of the roles that I've had over that period of time. So in 2008, I started at SaskTel as a business metrics analyst, which is really like a data analyst. I was there for a few years, got pretty good at what I was doing, and was asked to kind of take over the role as the manager in that area. Over the next 6 years, really it was around doing very similar stuff. And so I took on a couple more accountabilities around resource planning, forecasting, and a number of other kind of operational efficiency pieces within SaskTel. I kind of wanted to try something a little bit different. So I decided to go into marketing and really started to support the kind of data-driven transformation within marketing. Before that, there wasn't as much kind of use of data as probably what folks would probably expect today. After that, I moved on to eHealth Saskatchewan as the Director of Information and Analytic Services. So the same area that Scott is in today, Scott Moeller. And then just recently in August, I moved over to SaskEnergy. So I am going to talk about each of the roles a little bit differently and kind of what I learned. And so my slant is really on kind of what I learned. And the reason why I take on different roles is really to learn something new and what else am I going to get out of that situation. So I worked at the contact centers in the stores or supporting them for about 7 years in different kind of roles of analyst and kind of managing different pieces. The stores and the contact centers were great. There are tons of data. They're measuring everything that's out there. So it's a great kind of learning space. There's a number of skills that I had learned both from the technical side of things as well as kind of automation and process improvement, forecasting, resource planning, working with different business units, all really, really great things. One of the pieces though I would always tell folks is depending on which organization you're in, you may not have access to solutions, you may not have access to dollars. And a lot of the folks that kind of are in this vocation, they're really good at being creative and developing solutions. And so one of the ones back in, it was about 2012 that we had developed, and this will make some folks on the call cringe, but everyone is probably very well aware of, dentist's office, doctor's office, or a whole bunch of other places providing, some sort of announcement to say, hey, your appointment is coming up. It's a reminder. Well, in 2012, we didn't have that. IT had said, hey, you're not going to get it for another couple of years. We don't have the time. We don't have the ability to do that. We had actually whipped that up in the matter of a week in Microsoft Access. So that's probably the piece that'll make some folks cringe. Now, again, it's using the tools that are available. How can you be creative with that? In that tool and solution, I'm happy to say that it actually was running for over 2.5 years, flawlessly, no issues, no errors, which is surprising for Microsoft Access, but back at that point in time, that's what was available. So again, kind of learning how to actually build things from beginning to end and make things work. From there, really moving into marketing at SaskTel. And so I was the manager of TV and internet from a decision support side of things, which was really interesting, really cool, different side of the business, and kind of understanding marketing and learning that piece. Really, it was about, for me, learning customer behavior and competitive intelligence. It's always interesting to see how you react or act and your competitors react. And always that push-pull. It's always fun to play with data and see what actually happens in the market and how that kind of interacts. Pricing is something that is super interesting. And if you ever get a chance to kind of work on that side of things for any products, I would definitely recommend that in telecom infrastructure. So one of the pieces or two of the things that really kind of changed for me, the fiber internet builds was going originally based on old KPIs that were, how quickly can we get the fiber network rolled out? Nobody had actually looked at, well, what's the value of rolling out to these different areas that are really easy to roll it out to? If anyone knows fiber and how it's kind of built, you can either have it underground or above ground on a pole. Above ground on the pole is much easier. You don't have to dig anything up. You don't have to do a whole bunch of work. You really just string it along the line and then you can hook folks up. Problem is that's downtown core. That's in a lot of areas that maybe aren't even subscribing, that maybe aren't even utilizing that speed of internet and don't care. We ended up kind of going down a path of fixing or setting up a whole bunch of neighborhoods that maybe weren't the best neighborhoods to do. So using some data and analytics, we were actually able to realign our build with the highest users, the folks that wanted it the most and would actually generate the most income, which also then helped kind of forward the build as we went further. In terms of eHealth, there's a couple of different pieces here that were really interesting. And I think for folks on this call, as you kind of get in and work with different businesses, the one that sticks with me the most, this is the one that our CEO used to use all the time. Nothing about us without us. And really, this is talking about engagement. This was more from a patient perspective, and it was really, doctors or anyone else in the healthcare field shouldn't be doing something to patients, but I think it really lends itself very, very well to kind of all other groups. IT or data and analytics shouldn't be doing things to people. It really should be helping about enable them and helping them kind of further kind of the work that they're doing. But again, the work I was doing here was really to help and support the whole healthcare system related to data and analytics, and kind of support the growth of use of data and bringing more data in. There was another kind of facet here to research. And so supporting folks that maybe wanted access to data that weren't within the healthcare sphere or realm. And how do you give access to folks that maybe have been doing it for pay? And so in the sense of they were getting grants or otherwise to do this work, and how do you make sure that it's both private and you're sharing appropriately? And lastly, from a SaskEnergy perspective, one of the reasons why I was so excited to join SaskEnergy, very immature on their data spectrum, and it's really starting a data team from scratch. And so that to me was what excited me the most. Now, I'm going to give just a couple of insights, kind of what I've learned through my entire journey from these different organizations. One is to share your knowledge freely. And what I mean by that is a lot of folks get stuck in this mindset of, I want to be the expert. I want to be the one that everyone goes to in order to get their answer, especially in the data space, because knowledge is power. But share it freely, be the one that supports everyone else in this community. That's how you're going to get further faster. And you also won't get stuck in a role. You won't be the one of one. Nobody wants to let you go because you're the only one that knows a system solution or otherwise. So share it freely. Embrace change. The change is happening at a rapid pace, as everyone is probably already seeing. Embrace it. Be the champions of change. you folks will be the ones that kind of move this further and faster as well. Scott kind of mentioned this previously, but never stop learning, regardless of what role you're in, whether you're individual contributor, whether you're a leader, you have to continue learning. It is so quick to be kind of outpaced by everything else that's going on. Scott also touched on this previously around building portfolios. And I would suggest, I've seen a lot of resumes where folks kind of stack up on certifications and, whether it's on LinkedIn or, whatever else in terms of training. Certifications are good, but don't discount the fact of building portfolios. When I look at a resume, I want to see what folks have actually done, not maybe what they've kind of learned and what they can memorize. Seek feedback as relentlessly as you can. Get it from all different areas in any way, shape, or form, no matter kind of what level you're at. Scott touched on the next two as well in terms of build your network. I would completely agree with that. I think that's what's helped me the most in my career. And again, informal, formal, doesn't really matter. Network with whoever you can. Data for Good's a great place to do that, but there's lots of other places as well, online or otherwise. Reddit's out there, there's LinkedIn, there's a whole bunch of different places. So just continue to build your network, and if you can, volunteer and give back. I threw my contact information in here in case anyone has questions or wants to reach out after as well. And I know we're not doing questions at this point in time, so I will hold that until after.
Right on, Scott. That was awesome. Awesome. I have a lot of questions about working within government, but we'll hold those till the end. And last but not least, we have Mike Burjack. You are up on deck. No, you're not on deck. You're actually up at bat.
Well, I'm batting on decks. Our metaphors are getting fantastically mixed here. Thanks, Kevin. And thanks, Scott and Scott, for leading us off. I'll represent the 1/3 of non-Scots presenting here tonight. And I'll share a bit of how my career trajectory has been. I think there's some common threads that'll become apparent as I describe sort of my career trajectory and things that have worked well for me. And I'll just walk through that briefly, and then look forward to opening up to questions from everyone. And just thanks, Kevin, for inviting me, and Cody for facilitating this as well. So unlike the folks that let us off here, I'll say that I'm actually a university dropout. So I did not complete my course through university, and that's largely the internet's fault. And as it turns out, I became much more interested in working on the internet than going to class. This was back in the late 90s. And that's sort of what led me along the journey that I'm on now. And I would say of the folks that have spoken so far, like looking at Scott and Scott's journey, I'm probably the most outside of data, but still in data between those two. So I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit. I started my career journey in startup land. And so I spent about 12 years in a various number of startups. And one of the things that became clear to me, and this is as a software developer, I should clarify. And one of the things that became really clear to me during that time was that there was a startling lack in many businesses of technical folks that were capable of stringing together a strong narrative, of taking a look at a set of data or a set of observations and creating a convincing story, doing storytelling with data, and what that would mean for the direction of a business or a team of folks that were targeting a problem. And that really struck home with me a lot, and I wanted to figure out how to embody that more. So after my period of time with startups, I switched over and I started working for a company called TripAdvisor. And I worked with TripAdvisor in a particular role that is not well defined, but is generally known as a growth engineer. And a growth engineer kind of sits at this intersection between marketing and data science. It's kind of this this contextual middleware, so to speak, which both has the contextual knowledge of how marketing channels work, and also enough technical acumen to understand what the data is kind of telling us, and figuring out how to derive action and narrative from the intersection of those two things. I spent my time at TripAdvisor digging into a number of different marketing channels and applying data to them. Some of the common ones that you'll see data folks working at when it comes to marketing, which include paid marketing and organic and viral marketing channels. I also spent 2.5 years doing growth engineering for television advertising, which is a interesting and challenging channel to apply data methods against. And happy to discuss that longer if folks are interested during the Q&A, but it was a phenomenally challenging channel to apply rigor against. I did a little bit radio, and then at the end of my tenure there, I was working with a B2B call center and applying data-based observational techniques, A/B testing, and other types of frameworks to allowing the call center to operate at a higher efficiency and a higher productive output for the company. And through all this period of time, again, I just really want to give a sense that, I think it's really interesting that Scott mentioned that how he pivoted and took his original background and then became interested and self-taught in data. And I think there's a ton of opportunity for anyone on the call that has existing expertise in a field. They might enjoy that field. I mean, if you want to leave the field, obviously this advice doesn't apply, but if you're interested in the field and just want to figure out how to take it to the next level, data is such a fantastic adjunct to really any other area or skill set that you have. And it gives you that capacity to bridge from data to that other field in a way that is difficult for folks that are in one or the other. And that's certainly what my career led me through. After leaving TripAdvisor, I landed where I am right now, which is at Shopify. I lead a team of global engineers at Shopify, where again, we are growth engineers. We are in the marketing org, actually the growth org is what we call it at Shopify. And we are highly data informed across all of our growth channels. And data is just a phenomenal piece of what we do. I also really like Scott mentioned off the bat, Scott Moeller mentioned off the bat that there's a number of different disciplines within a data team. So I can speak to that really quickly. There's the subject matter experts that often apply in a team. So that would be typically marketers. And if you're in a growth org, so in the orgs that I'm part of, we would have a marketer, they'd be a subject matter expert. Of course, whatever field you were in, they'd have a subject matter expert, and they may or may not be technical. Here's where the narrative power comes into play. Then you'd have various types of data folks, like data warehouse is another great example. That's a very technical facility around moving the ones and zeros around, ETL construction and data modeling, which is how do you get from the raw data to a type of data that can help answer questions. Experimentation is another really big piece, and I love experimentation. Again, happy to maybe go longer there if there's some interest. And then there's kind of dashboarding and observational data work. One of the things that drove my career is I really like scorekeeping. And one of my early frustrations with being very data informed around the narrative is in some applications, it can be difficult to know if that even if you deliver the narrative and you have folks that are really interested, what was the impact? What was the impact there? And I tend to be a very impact focused person. I want to understand that the narrative drove folks or the company or my colleagues in a direction that we might not have otherwise gone in. And I want to be able to do that by measuring it because I'm lazy. So I don't want to be clever. I want scorekeeping to be kind of easy. And that's really what drove me into marketing it's scorekeeping and marketing is really, I don't want to say it's easy. Measuring it can actually be very challenging. But the top level metric is usually pretty clear. Either you're growing a company's top line or you're not. Either you're signing up new customers or retaining more customers or you're not. And that can be a really clear stress test into how well you and the folks that you're working with are able to take the information that's embedded in the data that you're collecting, generate a narrative out of it, test hypotheses against it, make changes and react and see how that's moving the needle forward. I find that just such a compelling way to apply the skills that I've gained and the skills of the colleagues that are around me on our teams. That's really what's kept me on the marketing side. A lot of folks look at marketing as maybe a branch of, I don't want to say this derogatorily because I love buying used cars, but anyway, as used car salesman or snake oil salesman. But the reality is, if you want to have an opportunity where the scorekeeping is really apparent, marketing can be a pretty interesting place to apply the trade. I will say one last item, and then actually I'm kind of done the narrative and would love to just turn it over to questions, is data can be very powerful. And one of the things that I decided pretty early on in my career is that if I'm going to be using data to inform the path forward of a group of folks or a business, especially businesses that are operate at the scale that actually can influence global outcomes, and TripAdvisor and Shopify both fall into those categories. TripAdvisor, we would have somewhere north of 2.5 billion people a day that would come and use TripAdvisor. At Shopify, we just finished the Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend here, and drove in that period of time, well over $5 billion of sales globally. And so these are pretty large, impactful surfaces that you can affect as someone who is able to use data and build a narrative. And for me, the kind of the tripwire that I've used for myself is to ensure that I'm working for companies whose mission I believe in, so that I can wake up every morning and feel really passionate about the contribution that I'm making to the team. And in both these cases, for me personally, and there's lots of examples of these, you can find them. In my case, travel. I mean, one of our key missions at TripAdvisor was we believe travel was the key to building empathy across the world and the people across the world. We really did believe travel was a key way of achieving that outcome. And that helped me sleep really well at night as a marketer, fully embracing the idea that the more folks that felt travel became accessible because of review sites and other sites like TripAdvisor, demystifying what traveling to maybe an unknown destination might look like, the better that we are creating connections between individuals across this globe. And more connection, I think, is something that we could use more of. And so I really bought into that vision. Likewise, at Shopify, we strongly believe that fostering entrepreneurship and allowing folks in the world, across the world, to take more advantage of turning their passion into a source of income and independence and autonomy for them and their families is really a key part of participating in our current modern structural societies. And so that creates a real incentive to wanting to continue to move the needle and drive that impact. And I found that really useful. So I guess that's kind of separate from data, but just there's a lot of power in choosing and choosing organizations for whom you really believe in the mission and applying your skills in that direction. So I think I'll leave it there and pass it back to you, Kevin.
Right on. And thanks for that, Mike. Awesome information shared. So we'll open it up to questions from the crew or from the everybody here right now. You can either raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and hopefully you know how to do that. If not, you can just go ahead and ask your question. Well, I know a few of you have some questions. All right, Marina.
Thanks. While people are crunching and thinking about cool questions, I'll go first. I guess my question would be more aimed at Scott Wells, but please, other folks, don't hesitate to add. So I'm kind of wondering, you pivoted your career, you went from a director role in eHealth Saskatchewan, you've been in the health industry for 3 years. Previously, you went into the telecom industry, which was completely different. And now you're getting into this very impactful role at a new organization in a completely different industry. So how are you kind of managing this coming into the new organization, learning about completely new industry, while also being in this leadership role with the great expectations to build a new data team?
Yeah, what's really interesting about the data perspective is it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. A lot of the same processes, functions are there. I'm a huge fan of learning. And so regardless of industry, I mean, it's awesome jumping from, and I was in finance before I was in telecom, I would then to, health, and every single one of them, it was a huge learning curve to kind of understand what was going on. And that's your first, 3-4 months. At the same time, you anchor yourself in the process of, what you've learned, how you do it. And it's a lot of it is relationship building, a lot of it is team building, and so understanding kind of how these things should go. And so having all those building blocks, learning as you go along, make sure you're asking questions and not being afraid to be the dumbest person in the room is totally okay. And 9 times out of 10 for the first 3 months, I was asking questions that everyone else in the room knew, and it seemed obvious, but I was one of the only folks that wasn't an engineer or otherwise that hadn't grown up through oil and gas. And so again, it's just make sure to ask questions. Don't feel like you're being dumb in any way, shape, or form. Almost everyone, in a good organization should want to help and answer your questions. And so again, just go out there, be you. And I don't think, I realize there's, deliverables and things that we need to do. We will absolutely get there. And it's building that culture and making sure everyone's kind of on the same page. So.
Cool. Baird. Oh, you're on mute. Somebody had to be the guy. You're the guy.
Sorry. Sorry. So thank you very much, guys. Really informative and very helpful. I'm also in the path of sort of changing my career from engineering, pipeline engineering to data science. And one of the things that sometimes is a little bit tricky for me is about building a portfolio. When I'm spending some time on GitHub, I wonder if I need to go if I need to make a great project, or I need to like build several projects for like showing off my ability. So if one of you guys could a little bit give more details in terms of building portfolio, that would I would really appreciate.
Unless someone else has, I don't know, Scott, if you've got some other thoughts on that, or I can jump into.
You go ahead, Scott. I'll maybe jump after.
I think all three of you probably do.
We probably all have some thoughts. So I would say it doesn't really matter if it's one large or multiple small. Really what I'm looking for is when I'm looking to hire, I look at a portfolio and I go see, do they have an understanding of what they're trying to build, or did they just kind of copy code that was there before? Did they really pick something that interested them and they can talk through it and actually, so if I'm in an interview and they said, yeah, I've done this stuff on GitHub, and I realize it's just copy and paste code and otherwise, or if they can talk through it and actually tell me why they're interested in it. I always say, pick something you're interested in. I don't care what it is. It could be anything. It could be mundane to me and I don't really care, but get something you're passionate in, build something and continue to either build on that or do multiple projects. Try a little bit of everything. If you do, a chatbot over here, and then you go over here and you try and do some predictive analytics or forecasting, do bits and pieces, a little bit of everything, see what you like and what you're good at, and then continue to build on that.
Yep, fair enough. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I would, my experience is I have never hired anyone, obviously, but kind of what I tried to do was focus on a project that was a bit bigger in size that targeted a few of the different skills that I had acquired. For instance, a project I worked on was to, personal interest of mine is real estate and stuff like that. So first of all, pick something you're really interested in, so you stick with it, because I struggled with that when I didn't. And then, go out and get the data. So I did some data scraping of real estate properties every time they were posted in Regina, collect that data, write it to a database, and then play with the data. And so I kind of stacked all these different skills of acquiring the data, manipulating it, visualizing it, and then trying to build something off of that. I thought that was pretty rewarding because it's a long-term project, but as you acquire new skills, you can kind of build on more pieces to that project.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
And to build on that and on what Scott Wells said too, like I think it's just to re-echo, it really is important to choose something that you're passionate in beyond the data part. Speaking, with a manager hat, like a hiring manager hat on, again, just echoing what Scott Wells said is, I would want to ask the so what question. Like, okay, we look at your portfolio, great, you've extracted the data and presented it in this fashion. So what? What is that telling me? What would I take as a takeaway? What would a next step be? What does displaying it in this way versus another way communicate to the observer? Why did you choose this way of regression? Why did you choose this way of aggregation? Why did you choose this modeling technique? And what does that mean about the action or the next steps that you could take? What have you done as next steps or actions that you could have taken? I think it's easy to get an arbitrary data set and just run a suite of tools against it and throw it up to the copy paste point earlier. But I'm looking for someone that's extracting some deeper meaning and understanding from the data set, and it requires some connection and passion to that. Whether it's I've had people demonstrate data they've pulled from baseball data, from knitting data, from geospatial data, from all sorts. I mean, to Scott's point, I don't really care if I'm interested in it, but draw something interesting and tell me something that I didn't know that you were able to extract because of the data and the processing and the system and the techniques that you applied against the data, and that's really quite compelling.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
For anybody else, Ashwana.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. Thanks for awesome talks. I have a question for Scott. I also work for a Crown corporation, and I believe there is an added responsibility to make sure that it's not purely about business. It's also about for the people, by the people kind of philosophy. Being a leader, how do you manage to achieve that? Or is it even a thing? Yeah,
that's a great question, because it's kind of like a 3 or probably 4-legged stool. You're right. It's not just about the business. One of the things that also drew me to SaskEnergy, obviously we're in oil and gas, and so it's environmental, and so it's about the province. I'm from Saskatchewan. I love Saskatchewan. I've got a lot of ties here, and so sorting that piece out and just making sure we're doing the right things, and hopefully moving the needle in that perspective as we go forward. But it's also about people. It's also about a lot of these different pieces. And I think, it's not one in competition of the other. As a leader, it's finding how can you do them both together? How can you kind of sort through and work through that? So it's about people. It's about the environment. You're doing it the right way. You're managing and leading in the right way. And, the other side is the environment. I mean, the dollars and cents and kind of making sure we're using the dollars that we're given in the right way. It's all taxpayers' dollars as well. And so kind of sorting all of those different pieces, and, it's different responsibilities, but it's kind of learning to manage with that and hopefully doing it in the right way and most responsible way possible.
Thanks.
I was wondering if I could add just one piece as well there. And I think that's something that we can easily overlook as data practitioners. But there's this great quote from John Hayes. John Hayes wrote this seminal work on the theory and practice of change management. Anyway, the John Hayes quote goes something like, we tend to overvalue the things we can measure and undervalue the things we cannot. And I think people and relationships fall squarely into that second bucket. And they're every bit as important, even though we can't necessarily ascribe a metric to them. And that's where ensuring that you're in a place that you've got passion and connection to whatever the underlying topic is that you're applying your data skills to can really help ensure that you've got that connection, not just with the data, but with the principles and the impact that you're generating.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Arnav, our data viz lead.
Yeah, so great talk, really loved it. I guess my question was, what's been some of the biggest challenges that some of you guys have seen when going from more of an individual contributor role in data to actually managing and leading teams? What's been the challenge and what's been the reward?
Okay,
question.
You can go first.
All right. I mean, I think the obvious answer, but I'll still say it, is that you can have a bigger impact, right? When you're leading a team, there's more things you can do. There's bigger things you can do when you're leading a team versus when you're an individual contributor. And there's a certain, reward center in the brain that I think supports being able to achieve those sorts of different sets of impacts. The other challenge, though, when you are a lead is it can be easy, and maybe I sound like a broken record because I know I've kind of said flavors of this a few times here tonight, but it can be really easy to get isolated on the problem versus the scope and the context of how that's going to be applied and what it truly means. And I think one of the key roles as you move from an individual contributor to a lead is ensuring that you help provide that bridge between the business and your other stakeholders and the folks on the team, and to really push back. And when someone comes with a conclusion, like I've worked with a lot of folks that, we'll do an experiment, for example. We'll have a test group and a control group. We'll do an experiment. We'll come with some results, and we'll say, well, we measured, a lift of XYZ in this particular metric, and so we're gonna proceed with this because we think that was a good measurement. I'll say, well, is it? What did you expect? Is that in line with what you expected? Why did you expect only that metric to move? Why not these other two metrics? Or what about this metric over here that I see on the dashboard also moves, but you didn't call attention to? And then you kind of discover that some of the narrative falls apart because they just hadn't thought deeply enough about the problem. So I think that's the other place too, as a lead, where you can really have a mentorship role in honing the rigor of the folks on the team to think clearly about, have you formed a hypothesis before you've approached the data? Not a bias. I mean, there's a careful line there, but have you formed a hypothesis of some ways to interpret the problem, and then let the data inform whether you believe you're on the right track or not on the right track, or kind of do some, I like to call it sniff testing. I don't know, maybe I have too many young kids with diapers, but does this outcome even seem reasonable? Like is there a narrative that you can construct around the data that even feels rational given your understanding of the way the system operates, or whatever it is that you're looking at? And certainly I've had folks come back with data and say, well, the output of this metric was XYZ, and it sounds like, but that can't possibly happen. Our systems don't operate at that level, or we can't generate that many, iterations per minute, or whatever the thing is. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right, we can't do that. Well, that must be faulty data then. But without that push, they might not have even gone back and revisited that. It can be just really easy to get mesmerized by the data. So kind of keeping that context, I think, is a really key value of a lead of teams. And as an individual contributor, these should be things that are on your mind as well. But certainly as a lead, building those skills becomes a very key part of the role.
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of the biggest challenge was, there was a certain level of production and proficiency in the technical aspects that I had. And that was one of the reasons why I became the lead. It may or may not have been because of my leadership skills. And so really, as you kind of take some of that time away from being able to do those things, how do you still continue to be able to produce at that same level and then trust others underneath you and make sure you're training them and getting them up to that same level? It's definitely a big challenge in order to do that. And a lot of folks, to my one point in my presentation, share your knowledge freely. Some folks don't want to do that right off the hop because then they feel like they may not be as important or as good as if everyone else can do the same thing. And so that to me was one of my biggest learnings and my biggest challenges. And I wish I would have done more of that sooner to get more people up to that level. In terms of kind of one of the things that I've enjoyed the most is actually mentoring folks and being able to be engaged and involved in their growth and their development. I love getting notes from folks that have moved on to other roles and said, hey, I got this new role, or thanks for introducing me to these people. It's something that is very, very rewarding to support a lot of folks that you've kind of helped get to that level.
I might actually circle back to and add one more thing that Scott just mentioned that kind of triggered my mind. And it might not be apparent necessarily to everyone on the call, but team leadership is not the only, in a lot of companies, in a lot of industries, not all, but a lot of companies, a lot of industries, the management track is not the only way to increase impact and have success. I know at both of the technical companies I worked at, both TripAdvisor and Shopify, the career track for individual contributor, there is a same career track with an equivalent number of steps as there is in the people management side of the career track. So there are individual contributors that are at the level of directors and VPs. In fact, they're in our company, they're called, say, distinguished engineers or distinguished data scientists. They are at the same level of seniority and pay and other benefits as folks that are leading fairly large teams. So it is actually quite a different job, right? Being a team lead is actually a substantially different role than being an individual contributor. It's not just being a better individual contributor. You're actually doing a lot of different things, from hiring to firing to performance management to maybe investment planning. There's a lot of other tasks depending on the company you're in that you're expected to do as a lead, which you don't have to do as an individual contributor. And so it's worth evaluating if you find that one or the other is just for you or not for you, and you don't have the ability to grow up into that role in that way in the place that you currently are, look around. And there might be other companies or industries that allow you to continue to grow along that path if you discover that people leadership, for example, is just not the right thing for you. I also know a lot of folks that have hopped back and forth throughout their careers, spending 3 or 4 years as a team lead, and then 3 or 4 years as a more senior individual contributor, and then 2 or 3 years as a team lead. With their knowledge, they can kind of be an even better team lead, and then go back and spend 2 or 3 years again as an even more senior individual contributor. So there's a lot of different paths through the jungle gym of career development, and it's important not to get too locked in that being a manager is like the obvious next step, because there's a lot of other paths out there.
Right on. Those there's rock stars and superstars, which is what you're talking about. There's a book called Radical Candor that talks about the rock star versus the superstar, and that's the person who has the hardcore skill they get better at versus somebody who climbs the quote unquote corporate ladder. Both are excellent routes. Good point, Mike. Cody, so before we've got a couple more questions up. Are all of our speakers, are we cool to, it's 8 o'clock. We said we'd go to 8, but we got a couple more questions. Are you cool to stick around? Mike, and Scott, or Mike, Scott, and Scott. All right, cool. Cody, man, you're up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. It sort of goes into with the portfolio questions that came before, but I was wondering, what's your thoughts or on what place do hackathons or datathons have in building a portfolio? And this can go out to anybody, like any of the speakers, I guess.
All right, I guess I'll jump in. I think any experience is good experience. I think try a whole bunch of different things, variety. So hackathons, I think, are great. Try that experience, because what you're going to learn is how do you rapidly develop. Other experience where you're building your portfolio, you're not under the time constraint, and so you're going to get a different experience from it. And so try a whole bunch of different stuff, and you may find that that's the kind of thing that you want to do. And maybe that means startups are for you, versus maybe you like longer development and you want to build something yourself, or you want to go into a different type of organization. So personally, when I look at it, to me, it's more about the effort and putting stuff in and seeing what you came out with it. Obviously that in a hackathon, you might be part of a team, so it might be a little bit different. But again, it's probably understanding that and having the conversation about it and understanding kind of what you learned, what you liked, what you didn't, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, huge plus one to what Scott said. Nothing to add. Yeah, the hackathons, if you do end up in a hackathon where it's a team group, can teach you a lot about what role you may or may not want to play in the future org as well, because of that kind of team environment.
Scott Moeller, you talked about using data sets from Kaggle and learning on YouTube and Coursera and GitHub and Python and such. Did you have any particular team environments that you found useful, or solo projects, or any particular environment that you felt was the most useful outside of the environment inside your head, which is ambition and curiosity and love of learning?
Good question. Yeah, I don't know. Just there's so many good resources out there. I think Kaggle is really one of the best. They have the Kaggle Learn platform also, so they have a series of really good courses on there, which are super quick to go through, and they give you kind of a great idea of what else you can learn from there. Plus just the community on Kaggle and the data sets and challenges and that kind of thing. I think that kind of stands out as a really good place to start.
Right on.
Thank you.
Thomas. We can't hear you. At least I can't.
Is that better?
There we go.
Yeah. Stupid Windows. Or less of a comment, or less of a question, more of a comment. It was reassuring that a lot of the lessons that I learned over my career, getting to being a data scientist, and all the challenges that I've faced up to that point, plus also the advice that I have given mentees and people I've had over my career, that they've been shared by Scott and Mike today. So it's definitely a note of confidence that at least I've been going down the right path for my career. I definitely would reiterate about the point about like any experience that is a positive experience that you can get enjoyment out of. If it shows off your skills, yeah, throw it on your resume. Because like I've seen resumes that have been full of open source projects, and I was more impressed by that because at least I could see what the person was doing, versus somebody who just gave me a resume that said that you know they graduated from university. It's like, well, that's great, but what can you do?
Right on. Good comments. I have one last question. I don't see any other raised hands, but before I step in, anybody else have any other questions for our speakers tonight?
Maybe just to really quickly, I just want to plus one on what Thomas said there, and you know, he was plus oneing on what Scott had said earlier, but it might feel a bit like, for anyone who's on the call that maybe comes from a different industry, it might feel a little bit like an unfair requirement that you would go into, say, job hunting with a portfolio. But I actually think that's a blessing in some ways for the industry, which is that, you know, there are so many areas where you don't get that chance to explore and make sure and find your passion ahead of time. I mean, if you're a civil engineer, you can't go and build a suspension bridge in your backyard, right? There's a limit to how much you can practice that skill set ahead of landing your first job. The great thing about careers in data is there are so many varieties of careers in data in so many different topics. Are you more on the analyst side, more on the business intelligence side, more on the modeling side, more on the, I don't know, just that. There are so many different varieties, and having the opportunity to play with that and kind of hone in on where you really find the most joy and engagement is a real privilege of working in this kind of environment. I mean, to Scott Moeller's point, there's so many data sets out there, so many open questions. You can really take a little bit of time and explore what ignites your passion the most. That's harder to do in other fields. So yes, that's a bit of a stepping stone that you have to create a portfolio, but in doing so, I think you get a chance to learn about yourself and about the career that might suit you best in a way that's harder with other disciplines. So that's kind of the yin and the yang there a little bit.
Yeah, excellent point. Scott Wells, were you going to jump in there or?
No, sorry. I just saw that there was a question in the chat just around mentorship and stuff like that. So if there are folks that are looking for mentorship or just have some questions, by all means, reach out. You can reach out to myself or even to Data for Good if there's folks that we can connect you with, depending on what you're interested in. Let us know kind of what your interests are and kind of, what type of field you're kind of in or looking for, and we might be able to support with that as well.
And yeah, if you sign up to our volunteer list as well, if you go to regina.dataforgood.ca and become a volunteer, there, when we have projects come up, there's often opportunities for mentorship on those projects as well. There's another question. Scott Moeller, can you share the resources that were useful to you? I think you already offered that up earlier in the piece. So maybe at the end, after this, you can just shoot us a link and we'll shoot it out to all the meetup attendees in the next day or two.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. You can post in the chat here, but that'll probably go away as soon as this ends, hey?
Yeah, post it in the chat if you can, and then, but we'll also send it out via email.
Okay.
My last question is for everybody. One of the biggest challenges that I see, or actually maybe two challenges wrapped into one, is people get stuck on the narrative and they don't know how to explain the so what. And so, Mike, you went through a bunch of really good questions of like, why did you do it that way, and why, and who cares? Essentially, is what you kind of ask people. And so, there's a narrative, and then there's also, I find sometimes when it comes to data, people they're not comfortable with saying, well, this is what it means, but we're not definitive that this is what it means, right? They want to have the answer, and you just don't have the answer sometimes. And so my question is around the narrative and around having a narrative that doesn't have an answer necessarily, it just has a probability perhaps, or an insight into a direction. How would you suggest data folk go around and in talking to their senior, their bosses and their directors and their VPs and their CEOs, how would you suggest going around framing a narrative of what you're trying to explain, and then also dealing with we're not 100% sure that this is the answer, but we think it's the right way to go?
So what I would maybe suggest on that, and this is something that I think every data person struggles with, is how do you get the narrative across? How do you tell the story appropriately that folks can understand and get? And I think, almost every organization I've been with has the same problem. And I think back even to, marketing at SaskTel, the challenge that we had was, every week there was a new campaign coming out by a different provider, and we didn't know what our offering would do, even if we offered the same thing as everyone else. And so some of it is a little bit of trial and error. Some of it's down to culturally, how do organizations manage that and the uncertainty, knowing that, it is a probability. But I would say, don't lead with math. Don't lead with, the stats and the data specifically. Lead with, what the problem is. What are we trying to solve? What are we actually going to be doing? And what's the outcome or value that we're trying to go from? And I think that's where you can start to explain, what, we do this, it may or may not work. Here's why we think it will likely work. Here's the rationale and reason. And yeah, you're going to have to back it with some data, but try not to make it too math or numbers heavy where folks may or may not get it. You need to learn how to package it in a way that folks can digest it. But it's a cultural piece where folks or organizations that are a little bit more data driven will start to understand, and those conversations will change. But if you can, learn the art of storytelling. And, even I struggle with that today. I mean, depending on new audiences or different folks that I'm working with, they may understand it differently. And so it's being able to change or pivot, kind of understanding body language. And I know that's a little bit more difficult virtually these days, but understanding cues and starting to look around and ask questions, look for feedback, and sort out how to do it a little bit different next time.
Yeah, that that cultural piece is really important. There are some resources too that can help folks with this skill. Like there's a great book called Storytelling with Data, as it turns out, by Cole Nussbauer-Nathlick. I don't have the link off the top of my head, but maybe Kevin, I can send it to you afterwards for folks that are looking for it, which covers it. There's a number of other resources. I mean, that's only one, but there's a number of other resources out there that talk about how to think about crafting narratives around data and what the narratives mean. The other part that I've had a lot of good luck with, and maybe this is a little bit more very tactical, but suggest follow-up steps that will help either refute or support the narrative that you're arriving at. Because in my experience, folks in leadership positions really like that, and that helps. First demonstrate that you're open to being wrong, and second, it creates a mechanism to kind of, to validate or to stress test the conclusions that you're coming towards. And this can be really hard to do. This usually involves looking at the data in a different way in order to kind of pull out, well, if we believe this to be true, is there other data that we would expect to support this in the data that we already collect that we just maybe haven't looked for that this narrative would support? Let me give one very, very tactical example. And obviously this is super specific to an industry, but just one example of that would be, when I was working at TripAdvisor, we were a very transactionally oriented website. So folks would kind of land on the site and either book a hotel or not. Like it was very much, you're there to do something and we're either going to help you do it or we're not going to succeed in helping you do it. At Shopify, it's much more relationship based, right? Someone is going to end up choosing. So for those that aren't familiar, Shopify is an e-commerce platform that powers some of the world's largest brands in terms of helping them sell. And, as a small business owner, choosing which software company to drive your backend for your store is a pretty major commitment. You're not going to simply do that by reading a single web page or going and looking at a single set of features. But we were trying to figure out, like, how do we tell the narrative? How do we convince ourselves that relationship building is actually working? And so we had to talk with a bunch of folks, and maybe part of the answer here too is to take advantage of the other experts that are around you. And so we talked to user researchers, we talked to other folks to figure out how do we craft a narrative. It wasn't only up to the data folks to craft a narrative. And we landed on this idea of, well, if we're actually building a relationship, we should see some difference in the behavior between someone's first session and second session and third session than when they actually sign up for the product. And without going into the details, we were able to put some parameters around what we believe the data would tell us about that journey. And then we could go back to the data. And this is where kind of not letting bias leaks into it. But so long as you're kind of genuinely and honestly saying, we would expect to find this in the data, we'll go look. Not, hey, we pulled this from the data, how do we structure a narrative around it, right? There's a little bit of you have to be a little bit careful about how you approach the data to support a narrative. And ideally, you construct that narrative first. And then you can go and either support or refute your hypothesis, and then ideally come up with a strategy to test it. One maybe last thing I'll just mention is, again, in my experience, a lot of leadership teams these days think in terms of bets. Right, so they want to place a bet, and from an executive team's perspective, a bet is, do I assign a team to this or not, or do I invest in this or not? And they're kind of making these trade-offs around bets. There's a fantastic book whose title escapes me right now. It might even just be Thinking in Bets that Annie Duke published recently. So Annie Duke is a world-renowned poker player, and she's published this book around thinking in bets. And again, if you're looking for a way to approach the culture of what your executive team might be thinking when they look at the work that you and your team do, it's a great book to kind of get into that mindset, and you might find that really helpful.
Yes, Annie Duke has, that is an excellent book on making bets. And she also has Thinking in Bets, and also talks about how to make better decisions and not focus on the outcomes.
Yeah, it's really a great book. It's a phenomenal read.
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat too. Cool.
There was one other question in the chat there, Kevin.
How
do you ensure data quality and avoid bias in data analysis?
I think the answer there just is to think a lot about the problem space. I don't know if there's other technical solutions, but I think like there's not only bias, but there's also the opportunity to build yourself up into a local maxima. And you kind of have to do a step function change to get into a new realm where you might build up to a different level of maxima. And so I guess part of what I could suggest, and I'll go back to my previous example, is At Shopify, again, we're building relationships with folks that are looking to basically attach the success of their business to the product, to the software that we offer. And it could be easy to naively look at one individual interaction. So we've got this interaction metric in our system that we call session to lead. That is, of all the folks that come in and view a web page, how many of them sign up for our free trial? That's a very moment in time measurement. And there's the risk, certainly, that if you overemphasize on one moment in time measurement, you actually destroy other parts of your data set. And so maybe that's one of the ways you can start to avoid bias in some manners of speaking, is to just not cherry pick your data, not cherry pick your sources, not cherry pick your metrics, and take a look at the entire context. And if things shift unexpectedly, that might be a source of bias. One other thing I'll mention, again, I think it just really comes down to thinking very, I mean, there are regressive tests that you can use to look for like actual mathematical bias in your underlying data set. But I think structural biases are the much more pernicious types of bias that are very difficult to uncouple without thinking carefully about it. So let me give one more example here real quick. And again, this is a very specific example to a very specific industry, but perhaps you can kind of understand the learning here. So at Shopify, again, just using a very specific example, our plans right now are billed in US dollars. And we believe that we have a hypothesis that billing in US dollars is alienating. Despite being a Canadian company, we bill in US dollars. And we believe that billing in US dollars could be alienating for folks that live in other countries. And so we wanted to construct a test around showing our billing options in the local currency of the folks that are there. Now, one of the struggles with doing that is, how do you ensure a cohesive experience between the folks that come into the site and see a currency option versus someone that chooses a plan later after their free trial expires? You need some kind of way to tie that together. And so one of the approaches that the team said was, hey, well, why don't we just not show the pricing plan options if someone looked at the pricing page before they signed up, just to avoid any chance that they see one thing before they sign up for the free trial and then are presented with something different after they sign up for a free trial. Now, the sneaky bias or the skew that gets introduced here is, if you're ignoring folks from your candidate set that didn't see your pricing page before they signed up for a free trial, those might not be price point motivated buyers. And so if you're then using that to draw a conclusion as to what plan they chose later on, whether it was in a local currency or US dollar, is that learning something that's generally applicable to the entirety of your audience? Because you've already chosen a subset of your audience at that point that you're measuring against. And so again, these are, I think, where there's some of these kind of pernicious biases. That it's not that the data was wrong. The data in this case had no inherent skew. It's just the construction of the narrative filtered out dimensions of data that kind of would reveal an underlying skew or bias to the data. And hey, that's really tough to instrument against without just having a good grasp of the contextual problem that you're dealing with. I don't know if the other two panelists have more insight to offer.
Yeah, I'll maybe just segue just more on the data quality side, and I maybe have a different view on it. For me, and what I tell my team at the very beginning of building something is, honestly, I don't really care about the data quality. Let's start to get some of this stuff up. It's not until it's actually viewable and visible that folks are going to start asking the right questions. And what's really interesting is that as soon as you get something up there, and whichever team, whichever area, whichever business unit owns that type of data, whether it's customer data, financial data, or otherwise, and someone finds that there's an issue, the first question goes back to them is, why is the data bad? And you will get more people to fix data quality that way than you will going to that group beforehand and saying, hey, can you fix this? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do as data folks is really just make it visible, make it accessible, make it usable for folks. It's very hard to kind of push that boulder up the hill and ask people to make their data better without some sort of stick. And to be honest, in most cases, we will never be the stick. We don't really want to be the stick. And so how do we get them to kind of want to do that from a peer pressure perspective? It's the way I view it.
One last question here is, I think I've said one last question about 4 questions ago, but anyway, why didn't Shopify store the cost in USD, but show in local currency using current exchange rate?
Sure, I can give a quick answer to that. So the challenge there, I guess, is just customer perception. I mean, if you don't actually pin it to the local currency cost, then essentially what you're billing them changes every billing cycle with currency exchange rates. And you end up with more customer support and potential legal challenges than you otherwise would want to as an outcome of that. So.
Cool. Right on. Well, Scott, and Mike, thanks so much for a really engaging and really smart talk tonight. Lots of good information, and thanks for sharing a little bit about your companies and your personal stories and your personal journeys. I know personally, I found this quite useful, helpful, and meaningful, and we got a lot of really cool resources out of tonight's meeting too, books and tools to use. So thanks again for giving your time tonight for us. That was very generous of you. Otherwise, our meetups are the last Tuesday of every month. We'll be taking January or December off, and we will be back in the last Tuesday of December or last Tuesday of January. We'll also be launching our DataViz challenge in January. And so thanks for coming out, and we'll see you in 2022.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it, guys. Good night.